guess it is. I was trying to
And
be
mine's
quiet
off.
over here. All right. Thanks, Russ. I appreciate it. And I always like to start off by thanking everybody if you've been to my demos before. It's only because of you all coming out to see what I do and to see what us demonstrators do that we get to do this. So I really do appreciate it, taking the time and spending the time with me. I got to tell you one thing that my friend Ron Browning told me, and if you've been to my demos before, he said to tell everybody in the group that you can promise them one thing, and that is that one person, at least one person, will have a great time doing what they're doing tonight. And if that's just me, I apologize to everybody else. So I do enjoy what I do. It is a hobby. Of course, my friends say that I've into jobs. So I started cabinetry and furniture. Of them have been hobbies and then turned into pretty much jobs, which, as they say, if you love what you do and a job, it's really not work. So it isn't. I enjoy it. So try to have fun doing it. I try to emphasize safety. There's not a lot of safety things going on with this small little spindle project, but you still have to be careful. I was just talking to a few people, talking to Frank, seeing how his finger's doing. It's very easy to kind of get tired or just not pay attention and get your fingers caught between something or whatever. So be careful, have fun, and just remember, it is a hobby. I'm going to step up so everybody can see me now. I appreciate Frank bringing the lathe out, or whoever sets this up or whatever. It's a little bit high on this one. I'm kind of in between. My stand's too high because this lathe is a little bit lower than normal, but I do like turning above what I'm doing. It's if you see me doing my wing bowls, it's really important that I get a good view of over the top and stuff. The tall guys, you get that view all the time. But when I'm standing here looking at something, it's not as comfortable. I may be doing this one standing on the floor tonight because it's a spindle thing. And when I turn finials and things at home, I actually go to one of my taller lathes. I now have a robust, which actually goes down low enough, and I can stand on the floor when I turn. But if I'm turning finials and everything, I will actually go to the higher lathe, so I'm actually working right here. And I don't have to bend over for it. But doing bowls and everything, I like the tools lower. Tonight, I'm kind of in between because I'm doing this spindle project, which if you saw the ones on the table, it's kind of just a little natural edge, thin stem goblet from a limb. It's a piece of trimmed wood come off your neighbor's yard. John Williams and I drove up here tonight, and we were driving past a big construction place down here off of 70, before University. They've got piles of wood piled up, and we're both looking out there like, think there's anything good out there? And we need wood. We've got more wood than we know what to do with, right? Yeah, this is the only time I don't have my car with the chainsaw in the trunk. But all of these are just kind of pruned off limbs. I brought a couple of examples. This is the one I'm going to be working on. This is a little bit bigger one in case something goes really bad with this one. I've got a backup. Yeah, you got to come prepared. But this one's kind of a little bit crooked. If you notice, some of the little goblets that I had got curves to them, and some of the pictures on my website, the curved part of the stems, some of that is natural. Some of it can be pushed a little bit more, get a little more curvature out of them. I'll show you how to do that at the end of the demo. But a lot of it is kind of looking at the log and deciding on a feature or flaw or something that might cause some bending. One thing I do want to mention that everybody introduced me at Rudy Lopez, and that's fine. My given name is Rudolph, and I mention that because that's the website. And you get to it better if you Google up Rudolph Lopez. If you Google up Rudy Lopez, some people told me that you find a really nice Cuban fella in Miami that has warrants out for domestic violence and a bunch of other stuff. But Rudolph Lopez takes you to the website. And on the website is handouts. And there are handouts for this project, my wing bowl, and I think my squared around project and stuff like that. So there's a good handout for this one that goes through color pictures and all that kind of stuff. So the first thing on my handouts, always evaluate the log, decide on a design. You got to start somewhere. When I started writing handouts, I thought, what do I start? Well, I'm going to look at the log, figure out what I'm going to do. So we'll talk about that with this a little bit. The little thing right here is kind of a limb grow over. That little lump that you have, that's a limb that got schlepped off, and then this grows over to heal it up. Well, that's a pith that's coming from that little limb. There's also, obviously, the pith going through the center of this. So, I don't know, does the camera pick up the little black dot? Can you see that? Okay, that I marked with the marker. That's the pith. And I can't tell from here because it's a little distorted, but if you look at it, this one is more or less in the center, just about. I mean, it looks pretty centered. I don't know how it looks on the picture, but sort of centered. You look at the other end, and does it look offset? Okay, it's offset to, let me see, I'll put it on the lower side. Is that the lower side? It's kind of offset to the bottom. What you want is the pith to be offset out of the center, because if it goes through the center, it goes through the stem of your goblet, and that's a weak spot. It's basically just hollow, kind of soft, nothing. And if it goes through the stem, it will possibly cause your stem to break. If you're doing a 1/4 inch stem, that little tiny 1/16 of an inch pith may not be a problem. It may go down the side, it may go down the middle, you may never see it, and it would be strong enough. But if you notice some on the table over there, maybe 3/32, a little heavy 1/16 or whatever, if you got a 1/16 inch pith, you got a problem. It's going to break the stem, so it creates a weak situation. So you want it to be in the center. So I'm going to flip the log, but that's the center. I will flip it around, and it's not totally on that same lower side. That kind of is transitioning through it. And then the other thing is I'm curved on this. So having a curved piece means the pith may cross through it twice. It may go through in the curve and out of the curve, and you may have an issue there too. So this wasn't my first choice. I've got a small piece of laurel oak that I brought, which actually has a lot less wood to take off than this one. But if you have chuck, I have a Vicmark VM100, and it will go down just barely to that size tenon, about a little less than 1.5 inches, 1.25 inches. So this one will probably work tonight, hopefully. If not, I'll have to do this. But there's a whole lot more wood to take off, but this gives you a bigger goblet. I wouldn't say that this size goblet lends itself to that little 3/32 stem. It proportionally, you know, it's kind of a little bit odd looking if it's too thin. The only reason you do those thin ones is just to practice. So all of my demos are pretty much a very good skill building exercise. The wing bowl, good skill building for tool control. This, another good skill builder for turning thin stuff with a 5/8 bowl gouge. That's what I'm going to use. So a lot of you probably use skew. A lot of people that I've been, you know, traveling around teaching this project to, they're struggling because they do the skew, they use a skew, and they kind of struggle with the bowl gouge. So I'm fine with that. You know, my way is not my way. It's just the way I've learned to do it, and you don't have to do it my way. But I found it really easy to do with the bowl gouge. I can take a lot of wood out quickly. I can thin this log down really fast, and then work the stem. So I'll show you how to do that. If you're wanting to get bends, I try to find the little grow overs in multiple places, and opposing grow overs are even better. The tall one that's in the little container, I've got it glued or stuck down with sticky stuff in there because it had so much bend to it that it won't stand upright. I should have left the base a little bit bigger on that one, but it got a lot of that bend naturally. Some of it I encouraged, and like I said, I'll show you how to do that. But I might have a grow over, say here, 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 here or something, and if they're totally opposed on the opposite sides, it will cause it to bend back and forth, and that will possibly give you an S-turn. The cherry one, the next tallest one over there, that one actually has kind of a bend. It bends different directions, and that's kind of interesting too. Sometimes they bend so much one direction they'll fall over. You just cannot get them to stand up. We just did one out in Texas, and the limb grow over was very close to the bottom. This is part of the evaluation, what you're trying to figure out. If the limb's close to the bottom, it's going to cause it to bend down near the bottom, which may lean the whole thing over. It won't stand up. So if I only have one limb grow over, I might put it toward the top, because then that's going to take the cup part and maybe just kick the cup over, make it kind of interesting or strange. So it won't fall over if the cup is just tipped over and you got a bend happening right here. So all of those things, just a few things to consider. The more you do, the more you'll figure out what works, what doesn't, and what you might want to try. But again, it's pretty cheap stuff. And along that line, the 1.5 by 1.5 or the 2 by 2 laurel oak pieces are there. You could use those. They don't have to be natural edge. Some of that appears to be relatively green, so you may get some bending out of that, and no pith to worry about, obviously. But the little natural edge limb ones are kind of interesting. So considering natural edge, the next little thing to think about is the shape of your goblet. And if you noticed, all of the ones over there have a similar shape, kind of like it's an OG shape. It comes in, down, and under. That's pretty much the shape you're sort of stuck with when you want to do a natural edge, because you need to sort of flare the lip out to point at the bark. If not, you're going to cut bark off. If your shape kind of goes up at an angle, then your bark is going to be long and elongated and come to like an edge or a point on the top. So it kind of looks a little not exactly like a natural edge bowl or something, because your bark is kind of strange looking. If the end of the log is not round, being some of those over there, one especially, the little shortest one I think, is kind of petal shaped. There's a lump coming out of one side. A lot of times you can get that to happen two ways. The limb can be kind of loby, or you might cut it just below a crotch where it started to split out and that one limb is pushing out to the side. So I utilize that in my flare as I flare it out. The thing you have to remember is the shape has to go in long enough to clear all of the edges, meaning if you have a couple of them that are sticking farther out than the others, and if you just come in and start your curve, those will flare out, but the narrow side, or the ones that are farther in, that bark will get really wide and long because you're not cutting into the shape long enough to make that flare equally the same diameter with the bark. So if you just have a little bit of difference, you can actually just sand the thin bark where it's kind of uphill, sand it down, which then will make the top of the goblet kind of undulate up and down as you thin the bark down, which is a whole nice, neat look too. I mean, I think it's pretty interesting as well. So there's a few little, it's kind of a lot of information right now, but once you do a few, you'll sort of start figuring out what's going on with it. So this one, I go basically just between centers. And I think I'll point this out too. There may be a problem with this because of the pith location. Pith location is, focuses, there we go. A little bit, there's two little dark spots. The lowest one, which is the black marker, that's actually the pith, and the one up above it was my center line. But the problem is when I turn it around, it is almost dead center in the middle of the stem. So I put that down at the bottom. The other reason, I had some checks on this end, so I'm going to be cutting some of this off, so I'll get rid of the checks. I don't want the checks up in the top part because it'll be in the rim of the goblet. So basically between centers, when I started, I already turned my tenon obviously. I was just trying to do this to see if it would fit before I came out. So basically I just would go between centers and center the point on the center of the log, and hopefully the pith is offset enough that it'll be outside of the piece. So pretty much just cut a tenon. I'm going to just show you my process, nothing complicated, but I do have dovetail jaws on my Vic mark, so I have cut my parting tool in a sort of angled dovetail shape. So it's very easy for me to get a very good tenon just coming straight in this way, and it gives me a dovetail. Or if I'm doing a bowl or something, I can come in from this direction, my tool being at this angle, which makes this perpendicular to the ways, and it gives me the dovetail shape. The most important part is that corner of the tool cuts the corner of the tenon out very, very, very cleanly. You can't do it with a bowl gouge, especially a 60-degree bowl gouge. You can maybe get in there pretty good with a 30 or 25-degree spindle gouge to clean that corner. But the parting tool just works very, very quick and easy when I try to get that corner clean, because I want the best grip that I can get on the chuck. And just like a bowl or anything, I want the faces of the jaw to face off on this, on the rim there. It just can't be a stub sticking down that goes all the way to the bottom of the tenon, because you could actually just wiggle it out if you didn't have these shoulders to keep it from moving. The longer this gets, the more important that is. This doesn't have a lot of contact because it's the minimal sized tenon that I have that I can put on here. And the log really needed to be a little bit bigger. But I think it's going to work, so we're going to try that. Grow over, I do have one right there near the bottom. I did have one right here, but because I had my checks, I decided to do that one at the bottom, and I'm probably going to put the bottom of the goblet about up here somewhere. So I need a little bit of extra space in there, so I figured I'd cut that out. So I've got my tenon on, so I'm going to just go ahead and take it out. Obviously, I didn't need to do that, but I just wanted to kind of show you, tell you the important parts about the the chuck shoulders and stuff. That's really important. A lot of people kind of make those corners in a little bit of a curve. When you try to tighten them in, the part of the chuck right here, the jaws, don't go into those corners and it shoves it out. It's a little wiggly. I'm kind of emphasizing that because the longer this gets, the more vibration you're going to get trying to hollow it out. So this is about a length, or just the other one's a little bit longer. 8, maybe 10 inches I can do without support in the hollowing process. If you have much longer, I've done them, that one, I don't know, it's maybe 10, approaching 10 inches or 12 or something, I don't know. And that tall one was actually about an inch longer than that. That one's been broken, if you look at it, that one's been broken about 5 times. And I've put it, the whole cup has been crushed as well because it went through baggage one time, didn't survive. But my niece broke it the first day I made it because it had that great curvature because it had 5 limb grow-overs in it. But those limb grow-overs are piths that are coming into the pith, which make it a weak spot. So that it's just a trade-off. Obviously, I probably wouldn't do them that thin too often, but you get the most bend with the thinner stem, obviously. So if you're going to have them too much longer than this, you probably need to have or borrow a wheel steady. Steady rest that is actually 3 wheels or 4 that come into this and steady it. So you will smooth off a section, bring your steady in, and it'll hold it. Like say it's this long. Put your steady rest up here, do the cup hollowing and all the shaping on the cup part, and then you can move the steady rest out of the way and bring the live center up for support and be able to turn it without the big steady on. I have some small stem steadies that I will show you that are really simple to make. And I'm basically just tightening this like a vise here, pushing it into that and making sure that it's seated in really tight, and then tighten these consecutively around for a little while. And I've got barely a 1/16 of an inch gap in my jaws, but that is a very strong hold because it's a total round circumference on the tenon. So hopefully if I don't yank it out of the chuck, we'll get this finished. I don't want to have to do a bigger one. All right. I'm going to turn the speed down, clear this out, turn the lathe on, speed it up just a little, and work that in. I didn't want to shove it out of whack any. So I'm just going to put a little bit of tension on that just because I'm going to true the end of this off. This is what I start. I'm going to true the end off and work on this a little bit. So this will steady it up for a while. I got to obviously move it out when I do the hollowing of the goblet. So let's see. All right, let's see how this is going to work. Still might like it better up there. I do wear a face shield. I may not wear it all night tonight because this is not going to be sending a lot of chips off, but I don't like getting hit in the face with chips and pieces of wood bigger than chips. Definitely don't like to get hit in the face. And I like to be close enough to see what I'm doing, and I don't want to be moving back like this to avoid getting hit in the face. If I want to be sitting right here doing this and chips hitting the mask, it doesn't matter. So it's just more comfortable for me. Doesn't sound too bad. Got a question, John?
Did you get that mask from Frank Johansson?
I don't know. I didn't get it from Frank. Why?
It says Robust on it.
Does that show up? Special issue. I think that was a kick there, Frank. So first off, a little bit about gouges. I've got quite a few over here. All of these are the same. They're just 60 degree, I call it an Ellsworth grind. I sharpen it with the Ellsworth jig, so I'll call it an Ellsworth grind. Side grind, Irish grind, sweatback grind, I mean, whatever you want to call it. It's basically a generic 60 degrees sweatback wing. This is what I'll do for working on the stem and all that. This one is a 1/2 inch 40 degree gouge. So difference being 60 degree kind of blunt, 40 degree kicked over at about 20 degrees more acute than this. So this one works very well getting inside here, a little bit of the shaping. I'm not going to be able to shape this really small goblet with this big gouge. I'll do the thin stemming or the stem thinning with this. There was a guy in Texas had a big hard time saying that, and he has got me so messed up now. He was like, this stem, thin stem, and now I'm stuttering around with thin stem goblet. So this is my 40 degree, and then I have a spindle gouge that I'll probably do some of the hollowing with. So speed, I got to remember not to hit the big red button because that makes it break time, doesn't it? We got to stop for 5 minutes and let it reset. I did that when I first few times I started turning on a robot, on a one-way. Okay, here's the question of the day. Has anybody ever came in to do in-grain piece or even a bowl or whatever and have the tool skate out on them? No honest people in here. All right, no, it never happens. So biggest thing is approach angle that you're going to come into the wood. Most people tell you, myself included, that the most efficient angle to probably cut the wood at more or less about 45 degrees of a flute rollover. So open about 45 degrees. If you approach the wood and touch that edge, the edge of that is pointed that direction, so it wants to skate out. On in-grain. In-grain's really bad about doing that, and it'll skate out to the side. So I'm starting off doing that on this face because if I skate out and I take a little bark off, I can take off a little more. I can practice a few times. If I was to shape some of the outside first and then come in and try to take that off and I'd skate down, I rip off the whole goblet and I got to make my whole thing about an inch shorter. So I always do this process first. So if you come in with the flute open, you'll probably have a little bit of a problem. So if the flute is absolutely vertical, it's not the most efficient cutting position, but it will hopefully not skate on you. Once you have some bevel contact on here, and you'll hear me talking a lot about bevel supported cuts. There's no place on here tonight where I'm going to be doing, well, I shouldn't say that. I was going to say it's not a place where I'll be doing a non-bevel supported cut, but I will be when I'm hollowing out the inside. Because I'm going to hollow it in grain from the center out. That's the correct way to do that. So I will close this flute and I will approach this in this direction. Hopefully, if it's not open even 1 or 2 degrees, it won't skate down. So we'll see how this works out. And if I get the speed just right, I can actually stop the log. There we go. All right, straight in. So this is Frank's live center, so I got to really be a little careful how close I get to those threads. If it was my live center, I really didn't have to worry about that. But if you saw me come in and then I move my body in and I just cut that just a little bit of a roll in, it's not much. I obviously can't go any steeper than that because all of this is in the way. But that's fine. I'm pretty sure that I actually cleaned the top surface off, but I'll just double check it. So yeah, the bark's all nicely cleaned. That's all good. So now I'm going to kind of start shaping just the first, say, third of my goblet. And I don't want to start right at the top because there is another possibility that I approach this and it does skate up the side. It's more likely to skate out on the end grain, but it can still skate up the side if I approach with an open flute like that. So I am going to close the flute up and I'm going to start down here. Also, I'm going to make room for my cut because if I start up here, I can only cut in about that far because then I'm just sort of heading straight into end grain. So I'm going to swing my body and work my way up to the top. So already you see I've sort of kind of lined out a shape, but I'm going in sort of at an angle. I really need to go sort of straight in with the bevel pointed straight in that way. Right now my bevel's pointed that direction, which gives me that curve, which isn't a bad curve. It's fine, but it doesn't quite give me, you'll see, I've got 1/8 of an inch of bark here, and I've got almost 3/8 of bark there. So I have to go in straighter, longer before I make my curve, and that'll even up the bark. Important thing to remember is you say, oh, I've got 1/8 of an inch here, and I see this happen all the time. They're like, oh God, I got to get rid of all this extra bark here. So if I run this bark at that same angle up to 1/8 of an inch, I've totally taken off the bark on the farther outside. So I need to go straighter, longer, rather than an angle. You'll see what happens when we do this. So I'm going to flute up, So I'm closer. All right, so now I'm maybe 3/32 on the thin part and maybe an 1/8 on the fatter part. So I'm much more even. If I go straighter longer, it will even that out. I might take one more cut on here, but I like the shape. Right now, once I thin the rim, when I hollow the inside, I could sand this down a little bit and thin that bark. So that would be okay if that's the thickness that I'm going for on that. So I'm going to take a little bit of waste wood out of here. And I don't know I can swing that any tighter. Okay. Not too much thinner on the edge, but I can't, it's hard to see when it's thick and thin. Yeah, so that's about okay there. I've got a nice curve. I'm going to leave that, and then we will just hollow it out. Diameter of my whole goblet now, because this is such a small piece, is less or almost exactly an inch. I usually drill the inside of this out, and I usually use that drill bit, which is 1 inch. It's a number 2 Morse taper, which doesn't fit in here anyway, but I think Frank has an adapter. But I'm not going to be able to use this because if I look at the diameter of my goblet and the diameter of my drill bit, they're pretty much the same. So obviously I'd cut my goblet off, but I do have a 3/4 one, which I didn't think to bring tonight, which I could drill down in there to the depth I want, and that saves me 60% of my hollowing is done with the drill bit. So that's kind of quicker, less vibration. So I'm going to have to hollow all this out with the spindle gouge. So I'm going to see if, I think last time I was here we did have an adapter. Maybe not this one. Nope. All right, so I'm not going to drill anything at all. You can use a Forstner bit, but I don't like the hole that the Forstner makes. Forstner makes a flat, square bottom hole, and you got trenches on the side and a spike in the middle. So this bit gives me sort of a shape that's already kind of curved. I use this for my squared around project, my vases. So the bottom contour I get is sort of already angled with corners that I don't have to dig a flat bottom out. So these are pretty handy. So right now, we don't have the pin in here, but I'll move it anyway. Shouldn't take too long. This is somewhat green. This, not super green, but so I've got just a 1/2 inch spindle gouge. My spindle gouge is ground a little more blunt than some. It's ground at about a 40-degree angle that is the exact same jig setup that I use for my bowl gouge. I don't have to change jig setup. I can do most everything I want to do with the 40-degree. I do have a more acute angle for getting into tighter finials, a little 1/4 inch and a 3/8 size spindle gouge. But for hollowing anything, my 3/8 one actually has a short handle on it, and it's a little more difficult to use in that scenario, but this one gives me a little more support, a little more leverage. So we're going to try this, see how this works. The other reason I like to drill the hole is I don't have as much wood to take out, so I don't get as much vibration. This may not be too bad, so we'll see what goes. So the cut is from the center out. So that's what I hate, is that vibration. I used the same piece of wood in Texas, and I didn't get nearly that much vibration. Let me see if I do have my little gouge in here. I'm fishing around in the box. Nope. I guess not. Oh, here it is. Being that this one's a little smaller, but this is my detail finial, kind of small gouge. If you've never tried a spindle gouge with a little short handle like this, you should give this a try. This is outstanding. David Ellsworth had one. Al Hockenberry showed me this a bunch of years ago. Basically, for doing small work, when you have a spindle gouge, and you're trying to roll beads and coves, you have a handle out here. A lot of people try to hold on down here, and if you're rolling a bead, you have to move your hand all the way around like this, and then when you come back on this side, you either learn to do it left-handed, which is what Ron taught me, or you have to move your body out of the way. With this little guy, you don't have any of that problem. I can work on the spindle and I can just roll my hand this way, and then when I go to do the left side, hand just instinctively goes to the bottom side and I roll over to that side. So I can roll beads, cut coves with the whole handle moving around in front of me, just working right here. So this thing is very handy. There's not really much on spindle work that you need leverage with a long handle. Bowl gouge, yeah. Spindle gouge, not so much. So this little guy works pretty good. So being that it's smaller, it may cut just a little bit easier. Not a whole lot. I'll try to move my hand out of the way. The cut is happening down on the nose of the tool. The tool's rolled over about 45 degrees. You can drill a little and then stay on the nose. You don't need to go too far out on the wing of the tool. I just have to pay attention. I've got the first part of my curve, so I want to make sure I'm not getting too thin on the sidewall where I've got the first quarter or so of my of the shape. So get a little more light inside here. And we'll stop and measure in a minute. But you can tell if this was too much longer than this, the vibration really gets to be an issue, and I really hate that vibration. So that little sound means it's getting a little thin on that edge. So, and you could tell I was getting a little bit of light through it. So I'm maybe 16th-ish, 3/32. I need to go a little bit deeper. But they tell you that your fingers are really good calipers and you can really tell how thick it is. If I'm feeling that, I'm thinking light 1/8. And I don't know if the camera picks this up, but that's almost a 16th-ish in that area. The other day I did one and I thought it was a little heavy, 3/32. When I touched this, these ends almost touched. They were just like touching on the end. So I'm like, that's not too bad. That's always an issue. So we got a little bit of wood to take out. Take a little bit more out. I want to make this just a little bit deeper. Are my hands out of the way enough? You guys, is it the light too? Can you see in okay? Fairly good. I don't know if you can see the tool working, but it's sort of working right on that edge, just right on that corner. And I can introduce a little bit more wing, but hollowing with the wing puts a lot more pressure on it, so the vibration is much worse. Okay, when I get to the bottom now, I'm just going to try to find the dead center, and then as soon as I hit the center, swing out so that you don't get a dimple or a pimple. You'll either end up with a bump sticking up or a dimple going in. So dimple going in is actually easier to deal with. Trying to take that little high spot out is a little difficult. So I do have just a little sticky up pimple on it. So So the shape, you can see the gouge sort of going in and out like that. That shape is the OG shape that I'm trying to form in the base. It just kind of comes out and up over the top. So the shape is kind of that little S curve. All right, so that did get good. Got the little nubby out of the bottom. And I'll check my thickness right there one more time. Okay, we're good. I'm going to leave it at that. Top edge could be sanded right here on the thick bark part. Everything else looks pretty good. All right. If there's any questions, feel free to ask. Get my attention somehow. I doubt you will have a break in my conversation long enough to ask a question, but I try to give you a whole bunch of information.
Rudy, how dry is your wood?
I like to say semi-dry. This was cut 3 months ago, so it's just been sitting around. Hasn't had time to spalt or whatever. This is a small piece of laurel oak, basically a little tree that was in a pasture, and I needed some goblet material. I went out and cut it down. This is the smaller end. I've already used up ones that are just a 1/4 inch bigger than this, or a little bit easier to deal with, only because of the chuck thing. If you don't have the small little Vic Mark, you're going to have to go with bigger ones a little bit. But it's got a little moisture to it. It's still not real dry. So it probably should get some flex in the stem. The drier it is, obviously, the less it wants to move. So I will move this sort of out of the way. They say that sort of gets in the way of the cameras a little bit. And then this one is going to come down over here and go into here, hopefully. I don't have to do this, but it saves a whole lot of time. If you don't use a light, light-colored woods will transmit light. We'll see how, I don't know if the camera will work on this or not from the overhead, or if they'll see it, but if I can see the light going through it, the way we do hats and all kinds of thin stuff like that, you don't have to stop and measure so much. You just go to the light, as they say. And otherwise, you have to just constantly come in here and keep measuring. If it is really long, sometimes you need the live center in for support, so you can't use the light as well. So then you got to move the live center out, you got to measure, you got to put it back in, you got to do all that. Because there's a couple of critical places. As I was hollowing the inside, I had already done this curve, so I just have to be careful when I make the inside curve, the two don't meet, as the joke goes. This corner up here is one of the places you can have a problem, and then the bottom curve where it's going away from you, you could make that curve too early and you could cut the goblet apart. So hopefully the light doesn't keep me from doing that, but you know that the goblet shape on the inside is sort of going away from you. It's kind of coming out like this. So if I take wood off of here going straight back, I shouldn't cut through my bottom. And then I start rolling a bead. Right here, this is all work. And if you know, it's just really good practice just for your beads and coves. That was basically a cove that I cut there, and then the bottom of the OG is a bead. So as I go down farther, I'll roll a bead, I'll roll it too far down, and then I'll start bringing it up, and we'll make the bottom thinner. What you want to try to shoot for is a consistent, relatively thin thickness. The pith is in there, and everybody tells you can't turn anything with the stem in it because it's going to crack, which is true to a point. But if it's thin enough that it can move, hopefully it won't crack. John Jordan has a really good DVD on the properties and aesthetics, or the aesthetics and properties of wood, and it talks a lot about that. So if I can make the goblet, if I don't have the pith in the middle of my stem, obviously it's going to be over in the sort of the side of the goblet somewhere. So if it's really thick in that area, it'll probably crack. The little goblet that's kind of bent over there, the cherry colored one on the far back side, the base, I left the base a little bit thick. That was a demo one, and I didn't get the base thin down enough. And you notice it warped over more than it probably would have if I'd have got thinner, and the base cracked, which it didn't crack apart, but it had a little check right where the pith was outside of the stem. So be aware of that. I'm going to try to make this as equally thin as possible. So I'm going to take wood out of here. I'm going to use my 5/8 bowl gouge, sort of the bulk wood removal tool, and start thinning this down a little bit. And then I'm going to just peel the wood back, going this direction. And you notice it's dark there. Well, it's dark because the wood is thicker. Does the camera pick up any of the light coming through? Anything better? Not as good for me. Now it looks a whole lot darker. I'm going to have to move it in a minute to see what I'm doing, but can you sort of see the light change? Okay, that's what I'm shooting for. One thing that will help you is that end grain transmits sometimes 50% more light than side grain. So as you come around the end, either right here or on the end, you'll get brighter. Right now, it's maybe equal across there as I start rolling the curve. That, if I keep the light equal, it'll be thicker. So that sort of saves you from cutting it too thin. You'll have to go with a scary amount of light for it to actually cut through. So we'll see what these things are so bent up. TSA is sort of brutal on things, and when the points don't meet up, that's not a good thing. Okay, that's fairly good. All right, so don't know if the camera picks that up, but I am still consistently around the corner about a 1/16 of an inch, so that's good. I'll put the light in here, and I'm going to use my 40-degree gouge now because I want to roll a tighter bead. That 60 is not going to roll a bead because it's definitely not a tool that's designed for that. So you got to keep clearing wood away so that your tool has a place to go. So the whole thing that to remember, the important part, I'm just really strenuously emphasize the bevel-supported cuts. I'm not going in and scraping wood off. I'm getting a nice smooth finish on here. I'm using the bevel to control the cut, and it rubs. I say rub. They always say rub the bevel. I don't like the word rub because if I rub this, I'm going to be pushing on it. I like to say float or just touch wood, just kind of float the bevel over. You want to know where it is, and I just want to float it around, and it's just rolling a bead. The tool comes over and under like this, cuts that nice little bead there. So the shape of the whole thing would be a cove and then roll a bead. That's kind of my shape. So I think thickness-wise, I'm pretty good. I'm going to double check the base because that's where the pith is, if there is in there, so I don't want to be too thick. So, yeah, see, like right there, I'm 1/8 of an inch thick. And up here, I'm a 1/16. So right there, as I go around the corner, I'm getting thicker. But the light looks the same. So I'm going to maybe roll it just one more time. What's that famous last words? I'm going to do, the object is to say I'm going to do 2 more cuts. I'm going to do 2. And that always saves you. All right. I was going to do 2, but I'm only doing 1. That's how you save your butt. You know, you say you're going to do 2, but you do 1. So if you think you got enough wood for 2, you still just do 1. All right, so that's all good. I'm done with the inside. We'll go down to the thin the stem. If you wanted to sand, if I was wanting to sand, I'd have sanded the inside before I did this, but still, that's rigid enough that I could get sandpaper in there and sand that. I'm not going to worry about it. The finish seems pretty good. I had a very sharp gouge, so we're going to call that done. Bring the live center up. There's a lot of ways to support this. A lot of people have used tennis balls, golf balls, styrofoam balls. There's a lot of ideas. I've seen golf balls drilled out 3/4 of an inch, slip them over here. Well, golf balls obviously very slippy. I want something that's going to support this, but I don't want to put much pressure on it because obviously you can't put much pressure on a stem. If you have something that's attached to the live center that's not going to slip off, my favorite choice is rubber chucky. If you guys are familiar with rubber Chucky products, this is the end for the reverse Chucky, which is this thing that goes into the drive center, and then this threads on. So these threads are the same as this, so I can take this off for a bigger goblet or use smaller ones that I have to go on here. So this basically is threaded, and it will thread onto here, and I can just thread that down snug. It runs real nice and true. Now that can go into here with not much pressure. If I have very long stems that are going to be really thin, I don't put any pressure on. I will put them in the cup, and I will tape around this with painter's tape and stuff, and tape around this. So I just kind of go wiggly around that, and then I back it off and pull tension on the stem. Rather than putting tension on it or pressure on it, I pull it. So all it's doing is supporting this. That's what I want to keep from whipping around, because this is heavy. Go with a thin stem, it's just going to start whipping around. As the stem gets thinner, it's going to get thin, and it will start whipping around. So, well, that looks really crazy in the video, doesn't it? Yeah, all they're seeing is flailing hands. So the stem will just whip back and forth. I have a way to stabilize that, and once I get this thinned down a little bit, I'll show you. One thing, be careful, if your ways aren't nice, like the one way or something smooth, you don't have them waxed, you're kind of be shoving your live center and your tailstock up, very likely could just stick it and jam it into the cup. So I just sort of get close, lock it, and then I wiggle this as I tighten, and I just see when it stops turning. Right there, I can't, with just a couple of fingers, with a little bit of pressure, it doesn't turn in there anymore. I want it to be snug enough that it doesn't skip, because if it starts slipping and you hear a ee, then it may just snap this off once the stem gets thin. So just enough pressure to hold it. And if you have a lathe that the hand wheel is very light, you might go ahead and lock this, because sometimes the handle is weighted enough on a Powermatic or something, the knob will do, it'll unscrew while you're doing this because of the vibrations, and then it starts slipping and it'll break your cap off. Don't ask me how I know about all these little things that can go wrong, because we've been there, done that. All right, so that's in for support. Got my 5/8 bowl gouge. We'll start doing some stem thinning. This is a spindle project, so it's all downhill cuts. Downhill this way, downhill this way. In the handout, it says clearing cuts from left to right, downhill from left to right. I'm knocking the wood out, and then I go a little thinner here, and I'll get this a little bit of wood out of the way to a certain distance so I can work maybe a 1/2 inch of stem, and then I will turn around. And I'm using the one side of the gouge for heavy cutting and wood removal, and then when I flip it over, I've got a corner that I haven't really used, and it maintains some sharpness. And I can just do a peeling cut, coming back to the thickness that I want. The main important part is keeping the bevel of the tool on top of the stem. What's everybody laughing about? Can you still see it? Looks pretty thick up there, doesn't it? Looks pretty beefy over there. I can see the pith, and the pith has got a little dark streak, and actually there was a little limb grow over, because that little dark spot is a weak spot. If you encounter too many of those, you can maybe hit them with CA on the way down, but that stiffens them up, so then you don't get as much bending. So there's some trade-offs there to see how far you can push the limit on what holds together and what doesn't. That's about, not quite an eighth, a heavy 3/32, I don't know. I think it's a little bigger than 3/32. Maybe we'll take a little bit more off of that because it fits my steady rest. So already I'll start getting some wiggle and some flex in the stem. So I don't know if you see the cup can move, and it will start moving more than that. So bevel on top of the wood right there. That just slides down here, gives me some good tool control. sliding down. The main thing is you got to keep the tool on top of the wood. So technically I'm using this just like you'd use a skew. It's just I find this bowl gouge a whole lot easier to deal with than a skew. Once you go thin, you really can't go back. This is fairly rigid, so if you're going to sand, sand now. I mean, as you go down, don't go too thin and try to go back and sand because it's too much pressure on the wood. If you're going to sand, obviously move the tool rest, and I just put my finger on top for support and a little bit of judicious sanding on the bottom. Don't be tempted to, especially when this gets longer, to wrap the paper around it. It's way too much tension on the paper, way too much friction, and it will twist it right off. Before you know it, it'll wrap the paper, something's going to happen, or you just barely squeeze on this and it'll grab the stem and snap it off. So don't just keep it on one side, on the bottom, run your finger back and forth on the thing, and just...
How do you know that, Rudy?
That's what I'm saying. People have told me about all the little issues that can go sideways on this thing. So... yeah, there's a lot of little things that can kind of not work out just right. But if you get a smooth enough cut, you don't have to do too much sanding. So, downhill cuts. So you notice just beautiful little curls coming off. That's just a nice sharp tool. Then I can turn around and do my peeling cuts coming back. I'm going to take a little bit more out. Again, this is where it sort of gets kind of boring because I'm just sort of doing the same thing. There's a whole lot of repetitive clearing the wood out. And again, emphasis on keeping the tool on top of the stem so you don't get trapped and let the tool or let the wood climb up over the tool. One thing you guys can't see in a demo is feel. And the amount of pressure that I'm putting on the stem as my tool gets a little dull is not apparent to you. But as I'm sliding back and forth there, I'm having to push a little harder. And that's what all of the little projects that I do, they're all really good skill builders in the fact that when they start involving thin stuff or intermittent cuts or anything like that, you have to have a sharp tool. You can't be pushing on this stem with a dull tool. So this one, it's not dull, but as I like to say, it's not as sharp as it could be. When I first came off the grinder, that's as sharp as my tools get because I don't hone them or anything. So me, right now, my taper's getting bigger, and that's not a bad look either. I'm going to kind of try to keep it the same farther down. But it's not bad if it tapers from thin, gets a little heavier at the bottom, it looks nice. But I kind of want to keep going straight, and I'm having to push harder to make it go the way I want it to go. Up here, just the first inch or so, it was peeling wood really easy. Right now, not quite as easy as it was. So, it's starting to wiggle up at the top edge. I can feel a vibration right there. I'm going to talk right now real quick about my steady rests. I don't know if the camera is going to pick that up, but it's starting to warp right here. The other thing about using something round, a ball or something in here, As it starts warping, the cup can move, and if it moves on the ball, it's going to kick the stem out, and it's going to start wobbling the stem. So keeping this in true, in center of the goblet is really important. So you notice I'm getting a lot more flex in the stem now, so you got to be careful with that. I don't know if anybody does this on a mini lathe. Does you guys have mini lathes to use? Anybody using mini lathes? Okay, if you do use a mini lathe that's not variable speed, be careful at this point when you turn it on, because you're turning at a fairly fast speed and you need that speed for doing that really thin work. But those mini lathes that don't have dial-up speed, they'll come on instantly, and they instantly go to high speed. So the torque of that motor starting up sometimes won't spin the bearings fast enough, and it can twist your stem off. So my technique for doing that, you got the little silver chrome hand wheel over here on the mini lathe, and the motor kind of turns real easy, so it's easy to do. You put your whole arm on the hand wheel, and then you put your finger on the switch, and you roll the hand wheel and hit the switch, but fast. You just roll it and hit it. So you give it a little inertia, and you start the turn going, and then the motor can pick up the rest and carry on. So you're, with that little 4-inch hand wheel, you'd be surprised, you can spin it pretty good. You could probably get 30 RPMs out of the thing by just laying your hand and spinning real fast and hitting the switch at just the right time. So that might give you could maybe do it up here, but I don't like, the hand wheel's safe and smooth over here. So that's just a little thing. So steady rests. I always joke about it when I travel now, because all you guys love the gadgets more than you love my turning. I can impress you with this, but the gadgets are the best. So this is my steady rest. It's a little spindle rest. If you can even find them anymore, I think young people today probably don't even know what that is. Some people don't even have them, but I think most everybody in this room probably knows what this is. These are arrows. You don't have to use arrows. I do archery. Arrows come in different diameters. This being my target arrow, this being my hunting arrow. They basically fit together perfectly, and I can use it to do a variable height thing. It goes from a 16-inch to a 20-inch. I have rare earth magnets on the bottom, and while you get the picture there, if it works, it basically attaches to the ways, and then this goes up to the stem. So I'll show you how that's going to work out. I don't know if it'll fit this lathe. I think so, yeah. So I can run it down, slide it into position, and I've drilled an extra hole. So the original hole is about a 1/4 inch or somewhere in that area. The other hole that I drilled is 3/32 up there. So for thinner stems, I just use the smaller hole and center it up like that. And then I have a very high-tech height locking device. Boom. All right. So that just keeps it from flipping. I know you'd like that way better than any of the turning I'm doing. I could go home right now and you guys are happy, right? It's like, that's the best, I know. I got everybody taking pictures of these things all over California, all over Texas, all over everywhere. So next year I go to Alaska, and I'm sure they're going to love this up in Alaska. So anyway, this is what steadies the stem. I've got 6 of these, and I just put them in. The longer the stem gets, they go every 3 or 4 inches, and it just keeps the stem from whipping. That, it doesn't need to be super stiff, but that's stiff. That's all you need, is just to keep that thin little stem from getting too wonky on you. So I don't think I'm going to need this, so I'm going to go ahead and pull this out of here, because I just have to be a little more careful with the tool rest when I'm doing this. So I'll just set this aside. And the nice thing about it telescoping is you could do just a straight piece of wood, and you don't have to have a telescope. You just have to tip it in, where this I can kind of move up and down. So I know you guys want to see this, so go ahead and send that around. All right. All right, downhill cuts. I need to practice again, because I was on a roll and then I got to stop and all right, I'm going to go to the grinder. sharpen my gouge, and I'm back at it. I don't know if you can see the shavings coming off of that compared to what I had before. This is just so much easier. How we doing on time? We okay on time? Good. All right. I didn't know how short. See, I can stop at any time. I can make it that tall. I got about another inch to go, but if I needed to speed it up, I could just shorten it down. And bowl gouge on top. As long as I've got that bevel on top, I find this way easier. And I don't know if the camera's actually, my head away the whole time I do that, or are you guys okay? Okay. There's a little dark spot there again. I didn't see too many limb grow-overs in that thing, but picking up quite a few now. All right, I got a little, I feel a lump right there where that. All right. I like when I see those and I don't, because it makes it weak, but it also causes it to bend. So again, gouge on top, nice float, slide it back and forth. One thing about being able to slide this back and forth is that it makes you relax. You can't really do this like if you're really tensed out pushing on the stem. So by being able to kind of slip back and forth on the bevel, it allows you to relax a little bit. Lighten the touch. I'm getting about a 1/16 of an inch of wobble. Again, just kind of float the bevel, and I think I'm getting a little bit thicker at the bottom, which is okay. Adds a little bit of mass and looks a little bit better. I need about 3/4 of an inch under here because I got to cut the bottom off. So that's going to probably be the end of my goblet. I'll call that the base. I'll do a little detail there. Give him a little spindle gouge. Probably should get a little closer here. Does the wobble show up? Yeah. All right. Wobble showing up pretty good there. It looks worse. Looks worse there. But does it look curved? Not much to, yeah, but I've got a curve going there already. I've got quite a bit of curve happening. My rubber chucky's still not slipping. Got a lot of movement. Got a limb grow there, limb grow over there, something there, but we're pretty clean on that. All right. Get this too much light there. All right, I'm gonna leave that little detail there. This is a clean cut on that. Now I just need to part it off. So you got to get up under there. That's why I've got to leave about 3/4 of an inch. You can't just part it straight off. You have to part under and thin the base down the same thickness all the way through to the center. Because the pith is in there. Again, I don't know if it's a good idea to leave this little chunk right here because the pith is it's right there. So the thicker this is, the more likely it is to crack. I kind of like the detail, but I may move this a little closer. I was kind of reaching far with that little gouge. Let's put this in here. Wrong way. We're going to make it just a tiny bit smaller. It's getting a lot of wobble. Maybe to turn the speed down a little bit. It can wobble itself apart. All right, it's not a lot, but I kind of took a little bit more off of that. All right, I'm going to take my parting tool that's got the point, the one that's cut at an angle. I got to move the tool rest back a little bit so that I can get some good support on there. And I'm going to try cutting the bark down toward the chuck to see how the bark's going to cut with this. If it cuts clean with this, which that point usually does a pretty good job, then I'll go ahead and do it with the bowl or with the parting tool. But otherwise, I might have to take the spindle gouge and go in there and cut really cleanly, askew maybe on edge, to cut that bark so you don't chip the bark all off. So hopefully that holds on. I'd like to get more speed out of this, but actually, maybe got enough time. I'll move this over here. And, oh, steady rest is running around. Oh, I got another one, I think. Maybe not. Yeah, run it back up there. Thought I had another one. I'm going to go ahead and stick that steady rest in here, see if that helps this little situation. Hate for it to come apart now. Thanks. All right, you saw how that works. Yeah, so that took a lot of that whip out. Good. So now I can get a little bit more speed out of it to do this little bit of parting job. Much better. Looks like it's cutting real clean. Okay, so we'll go ahead and go with the parting tool. All right, so what I do is kind of look up at the top and try to angle my parting tool in at the same angle. And this is where it can go really bad, because you can get the parting tool trapped in there. You want to keep the parting tool a little bit tilted from vertical. So if the tool is straight up, you want to maybe lean it over just a little. So not straight up and down, just maybe tipped over just a little so that this top edge does not contact the spinning part here and trap it, and it'll flip it over and bust this off. So I know that too for a fact, John. I do have, once I get in there that far, I have a smaller parting tool that I like to use. And this is sometimes you can find them now. This is a Robert Sorby. It's a 1/16 thick, but it's only 3/8 high. The ones that are 1/16 and like an inch high, don't do this because it's too tall for the radius and it will trap it and flip it over. So it has to be stiff enough that you can reach off the rest a little bit. If I had maybe a short rest, I'd maybe get it a little closer, but I should be able to reach off of there about that. And my thickness is consistent up in there. So I'm going to go ahead and try to trim this out. And I don't think, you won't get a camera shot of this, but should have sharpened the parting tool. All right, I'm down to about 1/8 of an inch. You can stop right now and just cut it out with a little carving tool. Like I got a little spoon carver. One of these guys, it's a little flex cut spoon carver. And I just get up in here, take this off, and just take it out of the chuck and cut that loose. But where's the fun in that? In my handout, there's extra credit for doing this little procedure here.
Rudy, do you put finish on those at all?
Yes, sometimes I'll oil finish them, sometimes I'll lacquer them. Sometimes when they're really, really thin and the stem looks like it's going to break, I will put a CA finish over the whole thing and stiffen it all up, because sometimes they need a little help. So yeah, if you're a little suspect or whatever, sometimes I've gotten, whatever down in here, a pith or something, but yeah, whatever finish of choice. My two finishes are pretty much lacquer or oil, like a Danish oil or something. So I'll do a Danish oil, or that'll darken this up. I think Danish oil would look better. If I lacquered it, it'd probably be this color. So it adds a little more character. All right, I'm going to turn the speed down. I'm going to move this tool rest, now that I can, over here.
You said you can force a bend on it?
Yeah, I'll show you what we'll do for that. All right, if you want to try this, like I said on the handout, it's extra credit. If you're going to use this little tool, put it in your hand like this, sort of make it an extension of your arm. Al Hockenberry showed me this. This is awesome. So you just grab the parting tool like this. So now you're not holding it here. It's not wanting to be out of control. It just becomes part of your finger. Very easy to control in here. You use your finger. Make sure you don't have jaws out on the chuck, because you're going to reach around here. Make sure you don't have long sleeves on. I'm going to use my fingers as a steady rest. I'm going to put these two fingers here. These two are going to go on here. I got the speed turned down. And I'm going to find the center. I'm going to give it a little speed. Take the parting tool, and I'm going to part it off. When you do this, you just don't think about it, you just do it. And that's how the goblet goes. Appreciate it, guys. All right, bending. It's already got, as it dries, it already starts to get a little bend to it. So I got to see where it's going to bend. And if it's curving this way, then I kind of, okay, right here, got a little thick in there, but it's got a nice taper to it. I'll go ahead and take some paper, and I can sand this down now pretty easy this direction. If it gets too much thinner than this, it's kind of, you got to be careful doing this, because you'll compress it and you might just snap it. But I had a lump right there where that, I don't know if the dark spot shows up. There's a dark spot there and here. So right on that dark spot, it was a little hard place, and it wasn't cutting that good. So I'm going to sand that down. Now, has anybody ever tried to break a toothpick? They're really pretty sturdy. So a toothpick's about 3/32 of an inch. So that's about how thin some of those stems are. So when you're done with green wood, and if it's not got flaws in it, like these little pith things, then it's really fairly stiff. So it's really fairly stronger than you think, is what I'm getting at. So don't be afraid to play with these, and take them as thin as you can and cut it loose and do another one. So I've got a rack. So where's the camera? Right there? Somewhere over here, good? Yeah, all right, you're seeing that. So basically it's a piece of pegboard. I've got two pieces glued together so that it's a 1/2 inch, 2/4 inch pieces. And I'm kind of looking, I've got a bend going this way right here. So I can put these little pegs in, and we'll see how well this works. Got one there, one there. All right. And we've got, if you've ever done hats, we use big rubber bands for hats. You want a little steady pressure. It won't take a lot of pressure, but it takes a little. So I'm going to put this rubber band around here. Not with the loop in it. Okay, and I'm going to pull it right here somewhere. And you got to decide how much you're willing to gamble as far as how much tension you want to put on it. That's a little much. I think I have longer rubber bands. I think I need a longer rubber band. Yeah, maybe that one. That first hole wasn't going to do it. Wasn't going to put much tension on it. Second one, maybe. All right, we'll try that. So I can spread the load out by doing that, kind of opening it up a little bit. And then I want this to bend sort of this way. So I'm going to put another rubber band on that with another peg, I think. So might need a shorter rubber band because I don't have enough room on the side of this. I needed to move this over, but yeah. So if I want to put the pressure a little closer, I'll go a little closer. That band wasn't putting much pressure on it, so let's try a different one. You got the idea. I basically just sort of add a little steady pull. All right, so that adds a little more. So that's pulling this way. This is right here on this little dark spot going this way. And does the camera pick up any twist to it? Starting to go. That's where it started to go. So if I leave it like this overnight, it'll probably go a little bit more. There's been conversations over the years I've done this about steaming it or boiling it, or Trent Bosch does a Vessels of Illusion where he boils a little piece of thin wood, puts it in, and it will manipulate and turn soft, and then he can stuff it inside a hole. I did one of these for Club Brooksville or somebody, and I had gotten a little bit of bend. By the time I got home in an hour, it had set a nice little bend. So I thought, well, this is bending really good. It was cherry. So I thought, well, I'm going to go ahead and boil this one. I've never done that. I'm going to boil it and really get some of it. So I put a pot of water on the stove, and I went and watched the news for a minute, and I came back 10 minutes. It had been boiling. It was straight as an arrow. So I'm like, all right, well, it'll bend. Well, what happened was I lost the idea of where it was bending. And as soon as you pull it out of the water, you have to start bending it. So I didn't know where it was going to bend. So I took a guess, and I should have maybe put some marks on it or something so I'd know, but I didn't know. So I took rubber bands on it, and in the morning, it was straight as an arrow. And that's the straightest one I've ever done. So I'm not going to do the boiling thing again. I might try steaming. They say make a steam tube and throw it in for they say quite a while, 20 minutes or something, and then pull it out, and they say it will be pretty soft. I haven't tried that yet, but that's a little more manipulation. But hopefully the base is thin enough, and we won't get any cracks in the bottom, and that's how you do the little extra bending. I think I covered everything, hopefully. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.